and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's dive into the top headlines of the hour. Ukraine and the United States hold high-level talks in Miami today, according to a Kyiv official. Meanwhile, President Volodymyr Zelensky warns Russia is preparing new massive strikes across Ukraine. The White House announces a US-led Board of Peace to oversee temporary governance in Gaza as deadly violence continues despite a fragile ceasefire. The board includes Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff, Tony Blair and Jared Kushner, with President Trump serving as chair. A Palestinian committee to oversee post-war governance in Gaza has officially started operations in Cairo. The move comes as international efforts continue to shape Gaza's future after the conflict. Residents say Iran's deadly crackdown has largely quelled protests as state media reports more arrests. President Trump claims Iran halts planned executions, though Tehran makes no official confirmation. Reza Pahlavi calls on the world to help oust Iran's Islamic Republic and target Revolutionary Guard leaders. Iran's security forces appear to have suppressed the nationwide protests after more than 3,000 deaths, rights groups say. Syria's Ahmed al-Shara formally recognizes Kurdish language rights and restores citizenship to all Kurdish Syrians. The decree follows deadly Aleppo clashes that killed 23 and displaced over 150,000. Ugandan opposition leader Bobi Wine is forcibly taken from his home by the military to an unknown location after a tense election. Authorities remain silent as the internet blackout continues and rights groups raise concerns. President Trump says he may impose tariffs on countries that oppose his plan to annex Greenland, a self-governing territory of Denmark. He does not name targets or legal authority as Denmark, Greenland and US lawmakers reject the proposal. Those are the top headlines of the hour, but we turn first to the Middle East, and the death toll in Iran has now risen to at least 3,000 people since protests erupted in late last December, with 2,885 protesters confirmed dead, according to the US-based rights group Harana. The ongoing crackdown aimed at suppressing the largest demonstrations in years has sparked widespread international concern. Reports suggest a slight increase in internet connectivity across Iran after more than 200 hours of an ongoing nationwide shutdown. However, access remains severely limited at just 2% of normal levels, with no sign of a significant return to full service. The protests have expanded into a broader movement calling for the removal of the clerical regime that has ruled Iran since the 1979 revolution. Demonstrations have subsided somewhat due to the violent government response, but the death toll continues to rise. Meanwhile, the US has condemned the crackdown, and President Donald Trump thanked Iranian authorities for cancelling plans to hang over 800 protesters. Tensions also fled abroad, with a protester in London climbing onto the roof of the Iranian embassy to remove a flag, resulting in several police injuries and multiple arrests. Joining us now to discuss this is Major General Gigi Davidi. He is a defence analyst. He joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for
joining us. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure, as always. Of course, we're seeing a slight rise in the deaths, but now they are above 3,000 killed in these protests, with information trickling out as internet starts to be reconnected back to the rest of the world. What significance has that internet blackout done here, especially, of course, in a world of social media where you've seen things like the war in Gaza, the Ukraine war, being filmed by bystanders on smartphones? What is the implications that an internet blackout has had not just on the revolution or the uprising itself, but also the international perception of it?
Thomas, today we are in the era of information warfare, and social media is a force multiplier, either to give any movement to gain momentum or to also suppress it. Coming specifically now to what's exactly the situation in Iran, just to recall, on 28th December last year, these protests broke out primarily, you know, to mitigate the economic hardships, but then they expanded into a larger political texture and ultimately seeking the removal of the current regime. Now, on 8th December, there was internet shutdown and a total blackout, and that's where actually the stage was set for this brutal crackdown, which ultimately has helped the current regime to quell the protests, at least temporarily. Now, the social media actually is one which can fuel the moments because the information spreads at the speed of light. And that's why the crackdown by the current regime actually facilitated to quell the moment. But nonetheless, today there are other alternate means. There are about 50,000 Starlink phones through which certain amount of information was coming or flowing through. It is not possible to hermetically shut down in totality. So that's why possibly the regime has opened out a slight amount of internet, embargo, and as you rightly said, that 2% or so the internet is functioning. But the point is that that's hardly any signs of internet being lifted. And I like to point out once again that today social media is a quite a cutting edge, is a force multiplier, and it can go either way. In this case, I think primarily the Iranian regime was able to put down these protests from basically to stop any information flowing on or flowing out. And as I think brought out by the regime Harana, that is the U.S. Human Rights Group, that more than 3,000 people have been killed, and possibly the casualties are much higher. And you imagine, if the internet was there, this would have been actually caught like fire all over the globe, and this regime actually would have got shaken up. So point I'm trying to make is that today social media is a very powerful tool in either building the perceptions or in changing the perception. Thomas.
Yes, and Major General Davidi, of course, a US response seemed imminent just a couple of days ago. However, we've learned that Middle East countries, Muslim countries in particular, have pressured the United States not to take military action as of yet. However, Donald Trump has thanked the Iranian authorities for cancelling plans to hang over 800 protesters that were set to take place in the coming days. Is this a win for the United States, or did Donald Trump miss an opportunity for regime change in Iran?
Well, Thomas, the point is that yes, a couple of days back it appeared that US may intervene because President Trump had made some very categorical statements. And he had assured the Iranian protesters and Iranian public at large that US support is coming. And there were signs that possibly the US intervention could take place any time. And especially there were certain military movements on the ground, and the US had pulled out certain personnel from their base in UAE, that is the base in Al Udeid. But I think possibly as an afterthought, because the Iranian government also has stepped back and they have assured that there will be no executions, and especially the case of Irfan was being played out. So I think President Trump and the administration has taken a tactical pause, but it's not that the option is off the table. That's what the spokesperson of the White House said, that all options are on the table. In this regard, two important developments taking are noteworthy. One is that U.S. aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln is actually heading from South China Sea to the Middle East. That means that America is preparing for certain contingencies. And the second point is, as the executions have been stopped for time being, and also killing has come down, so I think the administration, U.S. administration, has taken a relook. And in this, Thomas, they were actually U.S. intervention can go either way. It can either alienate the local population because they want the movement to be homegrown, indigenous. They don't want the foreign imprint on the movement. So therefore, this also was one of the factors that if the intervention was there, possibly the public opinion might have changed in the favor of the regime. So I think this tactical pause is well thought through, but I don't know why should President Trump be thanking the Iranian regime. Rather, they should be put on the hold, and stern warning should be given that in case they resort to killing once
Yes.
again, then possibly intervention could take place. Thomas.
Yes, Major General Gigi Davidi. Do stay with us as we stay in the Middle East, but to a different development. And US President Donald Trump has unveiled the founding members of the Gaza Board of Peace, which will oversee Gaza's post-war transition. The board includes prominent figures such as US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, Trump's Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and son-in-law Jared Kushner, and the World Bank President Ajay Banga. Trump will chair the board, calling it the greatest and most prestigious board ever assembled. Its role will include managing Gaza's transitional government and creating an international stabilization force to ensure security. US Major General Jasper Jeffers will lead the International Stabilization Force, and this announcement follows the formation of a 15-member Palestinian technocratic committee tasked with overseeing Gaza's daily governance. The move is part of Trump's broader peace plan, which began with a ceasefire agreement in October 2025, and the plan's second phase aims to bring stability and long-term peace to Gaza. Joining us now once again is Major General Gigi Davidi. Of course, many of these members of this Board of Peace, pretty controversial to say the least. Tony Blair, the former UK Prime Minister who led the United Kingdom, followed the United States into Iraq in 2003, in the Middle East by many countries considered a war criminal. You've also got the likes of Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Steve Witkoff, of course, a real estate tycoon prior to his diplomatic background with Donald Trump 2.0. And of course you have Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, many of which he said he lacked depth on Palestinian issues and is tilted heavily towards Israeli strategic goals. Now, we only have 7 of these members out of the supposed 15 that we are eventually meant to get. Do you think these individuals will do a good and lasting, of course, job at pressing the Palestinian issue and, as Donald Trump puts it, create peace in the Middle East?
Well, Thomas, President Trump's 20-point peace plan, which was unfolded in October last year, did not make much headway because of 2-3 reasons. First and foremost, the ceasefire, was monitored, but not very effectively. There were violation of ceasefire by the either side. So therefore, there was no sanctity of the ceasefire because the monitoring mechanism was not in place. The second was important issue was what is the future of Palestine. Now that is very important because you can have a temporary ceasefire or temporary cessation of hostility, but the long-term issue is ultimately what is going to be the future of Palestine, and that's why President Trump had nominated this board, the Board of Peace, and the 15 members were supposed to be there, but this board actually did not take shape on the ground. Now, with the 8 members, it appears that there's going to be some movement forward, and there's also going to be a stabilization force headed by a 2-star general. Now, these are actually the steps which are now giving shape to the 20-point peace plan. But as you rightly said, the board is squeaked because it's more favorably inclined to the Israelis, and Palestinians will always have a question mark or have a serious doubt or lack of trust as to how far this board is going to meet justice to the Palestinian cause. So therefore, I think we have to wait and watch. But on the face of it, it's actually symbolic at this stage. But how exactly they deliver on the ground, only time will tell. But at the face of it, it doesn't sound to be a neutral board and going to help Palestinians to build up trust where, because there is a serious trust deficit. But let's see, wait and watch how the board progresses. But there are big question mark ultimately because the constitution of the board is not neutral.
One major aspect of this, of course, is before we move on to phase two, assumingly we have to finish phase one. That's not done. We haven't had the return of all the hostages. Some of the remains of a singular Israeli hostage remain in Gaza. There has not been a complete cessation of hostilities. There's been over 400 people killed in Gaza since the ceasefire was announced, with 10 killed just 2 days ago. 3 Israelis have lost their lives. The unrestricted flow of aid is not happening. Of course, Donald Trump wants to move on with this plan. However, is he right to do so in a symbolic way before the first phase is even finished yet?
Absolutely, Thomas, because the first phase was very crucial for the follow-up development to take place. But as I brought out that there was no foolproof mechanism to ensure that the ceasefire sanctity is maintained. And that's why there have been killings and almost 400 people have been killed after the ceasefire was announced. So that's one big lacuna or one big void. And the second point is that, the release of all the hostages still has not taken place. So that's again remains one of the question mark. And thirdly, the flow of the aid, because Israelis have been putting limitations and also blocking the aid, which actually adds to the further misery than human rights issues. So point is that I feel that until phase one had stabilized or until phase one had actually been consolidated, then only phase two should have been actually unfolded. But point is, as long as phase one is not fully consolidated or at least fully stabilized, I think phase two will be on a very shaky foundation. And generally, when we go about, peace, or when we go about certain initiatives on a peace, we ensure that it is graduated phase by phase until first phase stabilizes. The second phase is going to be on a very shaky wicket. Thomas.
Okay, Major General Gigi Davidi, thank you very much for taking the time and joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. We now move on and we stay in the region, and US President Donald Trump has offered to mediate the long-running dispute between Egypt and Ethiopia over the Nile River waters, saying Washington is ready to restart talks on the controversial Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. In a letter to Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, Trump said no single country should control the Nile and disadvantage its neighbours, while warning the dispute must not escalate into a military conflict. Ethiopia says the multi-billion-dollar dam is vital for power generation and economic growth, while Egypt argues it threatens its water security as the country depends almost entirely on the Nile. Trump said US-led mediation could help guarantee predictable water flows during droughts, while allowing Ethiopia to generate electricity, adding that fair, transparent negotiations could deliver a lasting agreement for all Nile Basin nations. This is a long ongoing dispute between Egypt and Ethiopia. Of course, the Nile River, the largest river in the world, of course, remains a point of contention, and we hear that Donald Trump is intervening here. He's written a president to El-Sisi, the leader of Egypt, and said that he does not want this conflict between Cairo and Addis Ababa to escalate. Of course, we will see how this continues to play out. We'll see if the Egyptian leader does indeed make a response. And of course, there is this controversial Ethiopian Renaissance Dam that is currently being built. Of course, the two North African neighbours will continue this diplomatic dispute. Donald Trump, of course, offering to mediate once again, where we have seen him handle the diplomatic negotiations between countries in Africa before. Of course, he did the same with the Congo and Rwanda after M23 rebels backed by Rwanda took certain parts of the Congo. But the continent of Africa, of course, not the most familiar area for Trump diplomacy. However, he has got history in it. So we're now joined by Shruti Dasgupta. She's an international affairs analyst. She joins us live from New Delhi. Shruti, thank you very much for joining us. Of course, this is not an armed conflict yet, Shruti, between Egypt and Ethiopia. How serious is this, and is it likely to escalate into one, given, of course, that the United States did not intervene prior to this?
Well, it will surprise you. This is one of the 8 wars that Trump keeps talking about that he stopped. So this is one of the disputes he supposedly already solved. And surprise, surprise, it's been unraveled again. And the Ethiopian head has already said that Trump had nothing to do with it, despite his claims earlier also. Right now also it is the Egyptians who are finding favor with Trump and his policies and his statements, because Trump's statement is that nobody should control the Nile's water all by themselves. Strangely enough, he wants to control the Western Hemisphere, but somehow one nation who is trying to put a dam which does not really stop the flow of water, but kind of has a different effect on it. It has a zero-sum effect, as in you have to, the water accumulates, its flows, so the downflow gets affected by the amount of water that flows at not regular intervals. So there is an impact definitely when a dam is built, and Egypt is scared that its water supply is going to be affected. So they want intervention, and Trump is taking their side from what I can understand of his statements as of now. It can bloom into a bigger issue, but I doubt water wars as such, which India and Pakistan and themselves are fighting. It's more of a diplomatic war rather than an armed conflict, and I don't think it will escalate into one, at least not very fast in the near future.
And you've said Donald Trump claimed to have solved this one before, not necessarily a war as he calls it and cites it as one of his 8. What does this say about the United States and the Trump administration's negotiating tactics when it comes to peace? Of course, we've seen multiple of his conflicts unravel. We've seen violence after the Gaza ceasefire deal. We've seen the Thai and Cambodia conflict flare up once again. However, and so what do you think about this, the negotiating style of Donald Trump?
Every single peace that Trump claims to have negotiated has problems in it. Every single nation that he supports ends up going back for more support and asking for re-intervention. And this is something that we are witnessing again in this particular case.
Why do you think that is? Do you think it's rushed?
No, because he seems to think that just because he said it, there's peace. He calls himself the peace president, but there is nothing peaceful about him or his theories or his policies. And his actions of late have proven that there is no peace in the Trump regime. He projects himself as the peace president. So he says, I've spoken to those people, and probably diplomatically they've said, okay, yes, we'll talk it through, or we agree with your point of view, but they don't really put it in action. He claims that it's all done and sorted. He's dusted his hand. And within 24 hours, I think there are so many of them that have walked back on the words that Trump says, it's embarrassing for most people. I think any other nation head would be really, really red in the face with the number of peace that he has negotiated unraveling. But for Trump, it's just, they decided to start again. I'm going to go in tariff, I'm going to go in sanction, I'm going to go and talk to them again. And he's going to try in the best possible angle for himself, his particular, family business, as well as what he can get most out for his business friends in USA in those particular conflict zones, rather than actually finding an end solution to the origin of the conflict, as well as whatever is troubling the people of that place.
Shruti Dasgupta, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you on these issues. Of course, we'll keep tabs on that developing situation. Now we turn to Africa once again, and Uganda's opposition leader Bobi Wine has reportedly been forcibly removed from his home by the military and taken to an unknown location in an army helicopter. Wine's party made these claims on social media yesterday. However, Uganda's military has denied the allegations, calling them absurd and unfounded. Authorities are yet to provide further details or comment on the situation. And the country has also witnessed significant violence following the elections. Sources say that at least 7 people have been killed overnight in Uganda after clashes broke out in the town of Butumbala. Authorities indicate that opposition supporters clashed with security forces, resulting in several deaths and the arrest of 25 individuals. This violence comes as the Electoral Commission reported that longtime President Yoweri Museveni had secured 76.25% of the vote, with nearly half of polling stations counted. Museveni, in power since 1986, is poised for a 7th term, though Bobi Wine has denounced the election as fraudulent, citing widespread irregularities during the election held under an internet shutdown. NASA's Artemis 2 is the first crewed mission under the Artemis program, sending astronauts on a journey around the moon. Launching from the Kennedy Space Center's pad, it will pave the way for future lunar landings. The mission, involving NASA's second space launch system rocket and the Orion spacecraft, will carry 4 astronauts around the moon, with a launch planned for February. By the end of January, NASA will conduct a wet dress rehearsal, fueling the rocket for final tests. On launch day, a closeout crew will secure astronauts inside the spacecraft and practice all procedures. The mission will last 10 days and marks the first crewed flight in NASA's Artemis campaign, bringing the US closer to returning humans to the moon and preparing for Mars missions. Let's listen in to what NASA officials had to say.
Around the moon, this is going to be our first step toward a sustained lunar presence on the moon. So it's 10 days, 4 astronauts going further from Earth than any other humans ever traveled. We'll be validating Orion spacecraft's life support, navigation, crew systems in the really harsh environments of deep space, and that's going to pave the way for future landings.
We are on track for our rollout tomorrow morning. First motion is planned for 7 a.m. and many of our teams will be coming back in on third shift to make those final preparations and get ready to roll, like I said, at first motion, 7 a.m. Takes us a little while to get out of the building, but about an hour after we get that first motion, you'll begin to see this beautiful vehicle cross over the threshold of the VAB and come outside for the world to have a look.
Well, that's all that we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.